Getting my driver's license in the US was not easy. As an international student, I not only needed a lot of paperwork to apply, I also needed to find a friend with a car who would be willing to teach me how to drive, as well as drive me to the DMV to help me take the test. It took me about 3 years to complete the process and to finally get my driver's license in the mail. If you want to hear the whole story, as well as catch some tips for how to get your driver's license in the US, then stick around and join the conversation. Welcome back, it's Alex, and today I've decided that it's story time. I want to share how and why I got my driver's license, because looking back on my international student experience, this was probably one of the most challenging experiences I had, and I learned a lot from the process of getting a driver's license that I would just love to pass on. First of all, I know that driving is not necessarily a need everywhere in the US. For example, if you live in a city with really great public transportation, you might not have as much of a motivation to go get your license. For me, I was in Minnesota for 4 years of college and we lived in a really small town. The nearest big city was at least 40 minutes away by car and we didn't have great public transportation. So you kind of had to drive everywhere in Minnesota, and I personally needed to at least be able to drive whether or not I had a car. Like once my laptop broke, and you all know how stressful of a situation that can be when you're a student and your whole life revolves around your laptop, and I actually needed to go to the Apple store not once but several times just to get my laptop fixed, and it was at least a 30-minute drive. Even though I knew people at school who had cars, I wasn't close friends with them and didn't feel comfortable asking them for a ride, especially several times. Fortunately, I did have a friend who was licensed to drive and was able to borrow a car to help me make the errand. And even though everything worked out in the end, I still felt really bad asking him for such a huge favor, asking them to take a lot out of their already busy student schedule just to help me make several trips up and down to the city. And it doesn't always have to take an emergency like a broken laptop to need to drive. Living in a small town with no easy way out is really hard, especially as an international student who's already so far away from home. It can be really easy to feel trapped on campus. So driving can be like a quick escape that allows you to get away from your small bubble on campus and to remember that there's a world out there. So personally, I had a lot of motivation to get my license, but the process was not easy. Because to get a license, you need to go to the DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles. And the nearest DMV to my campus was 20 minutes away by car at least. So you need to be able to drive to get to the place where you can apply for the right to drive. And there were a few other obstacles along the way that I'll explain later on in this video, but for now, I just want to walk you through the step-by-step process of how I got my driver's license based on what the process looks like in Minnesota. And at the end of the day, the process is pretty similar across all 50 states with a few differences. So after you hear my story, and if you feel like getting your driver's license, you can just look up your local DMV and find out what the process looks like in your state. With that, let's get started. So as somebody who's above the age of 18 and was not already licensed to drive in my home country, the first step I needed to take in Minnesota was to pass a theory test, which would then get me a driver's permit. Not a driving license yet, a permit. I'll explain. A theory test is exactly what you might imagine it to be. It's a test that you can study for, and then on the day of the test, you answer questions about the local driving laws, the road signs, what the correct way to park on the side of the street is, etc. And the nice thing is you can find all the answers to all these questions online. Every state has something called a driver's manual that you can look through and study before taking your theory test. And actually, I've put a link in the description box below to every state's driver's manual, so you can click on that link and find your state's driver's manual. But I gotta say, it's not strategic enough to just read the driver's manual and try to memorize all the information before taking your test. Because first of all, that's really overwhelming. And second of all, you can't exactly guarantee what questions they're going to ask you during the test. So the other thing that I did that really helped me was take a practice test. And you can find practice tests online for free. There are a lot of paid ones out there, so you're welcome. I don't own them. You can try them if you want to and see what the differences are. But in my opinion, why pay for something when you can get all the practice you need at no cost? So I did this by Google searching the term Minnesota free driving permit test, and you can see the results are already showing up here. And I did this because obviously I want results relevant to my local state. I want the word free in there because I don't want to have to pay for my practice test. And I specifically wrote permit practice test as opposed to any other kind of practice driving test. And I like this one right here. The second link took me to where I wanted to go, because when you scroll down here, you'll see that there are a variety of tests that you can take. Obviously, on the day of your theory exam, you're only going to take one test, but exposing yourself to as many different possible questions is a great way to continuously test your driving knowledge and to not get stuck taking the same test over and over again, answering the same 40 questions over and over again without realizing that there might be 100 different questions that the DMV might be picking from randomly on the day of your test. So at least these 3 tests from what I'm looking at are free. I would really recommend you just jump around and try them out. Doing these tests over and over again, as well as referring back to the manual for textbook answers whenever I needed, was really what helped me prepare for my test as best as possible. Now, studying for this test was the easy part. I now needed to find somebody with a car who would be willing to drive me to the DMV and then wait for me at the DMV so they could then drive me back to campus when I was done. So I not only needed a friend who could drive, I needed a really good friend who would have time and patience for that kind of commitment for me. Now, because of my upbringing, I was always taught not to rely on other people too much or to avoid being in a position where you end up owing somebody for a huge favor. And to me at the time, asking for someone to drive me to the DMV and wait for me for that long felt like a huge favor as a student. But eventually, of course, I was just so desperate to get my permit test done that I just took a leap of faith and asked one of my friends, who I thought was one of my best bets. We were good friends, but we weren't best friends, so I had no idea how he was going to respond to a kind of request like this. But fortunately, to my surprise, he was actually really excited to help me out, which goes to show that sometimes all you have to do is to ask to get what you want and remind yourself that the worst they could say is no, and then you'll just move on and find someone else. Anyway, I got my ride. Now, on the day of the test, I needed quite a bit of paperwork to prove my identity and to prove what's known as my lawful presence as an international student. Before I jump in, I'm just going to say this now. You can never bring too much documentation when you're dealing with the government. So bring every document that you think you might need. In Minnesota anyway, you need at least one primary document to prove your identity and one secondary document to prove your identity. And the DMV usually lists what kinds of identification are usually acceptable for these requirements, but I didn't want to take any risks and I brought every piece of documentation that I thought I would need. So for international students, I brought my passport that had my F1 visa in it. I brought my social security card. I brought my I-20. I even brought my I-94, which I didn't even really know I would need, but didn't want to take any chances and I just printed it out. Now, funnily enough, one of my friends who was taking her test around the same time as me also was bringing a lot of documentation, but didn't think that the I-94 was going to be as important because if you're familiar with this, the I-94 is just your record for when you first or last entered the United States. It's just your travel information. And one could argue, why is your travel information relevant to getting your driver's license? And who could blame my friend because she was already bringing so much important documentation with her that the I-94 didn't seem as important when put next to your passport and your I-20. But it turns out when she got to the DMV, the I-94 was actually the one document that she was missing. So the DMV turned her away and told her that they couldn't process her application that day. So she had to go home, print out her I-94, and then book an appointment to come back to the DMV another day. So again, my rule of thumb is really just to bring more documentation than you think you need and, minimize any work you have to do in the future. Other than that, the test is actually free for the first 2 times in Minnesota anyway. If you fail twice and you come back for a third time, then you will have to pay like a $20 fee. I actually ended up failing my permit test the first time that I came, and I knew that there was a $20 fee on the third try, and I just really did not want to pay that fee. So I studied extra hard for my second time, and I passed on my second try. So that was a huge relief. But another reason to avoid paying unnecessary fees isn't just so you can quickly get your driver's permit. It's also because when you actually get approved for your driver's permit, when you pass that theory test, you will have to pay a mandatory fee of about $15 or so anyway, so why pay lots of fees along the way when you're already going to have to pay some fees? But anyway, once you pass your test and once you paid that fee, you get to fill out all of the details that you want to show up on your card, like your name, your date of birth, your height, your eye color, and they take a photo of you on the spot. And then all you have to do after that is go home and wait for your card to show up in the mail, which is a really nice feeling. And for those of you who don't know, a driver's permit is not a license, like I said in the beginning, but it does still allow you to drive, just not without a licensed adult in the car next to you. So basically, no unsupervised driving. But now that you're allowed to get behind the wheel, this is the chance to practice for the next step in getting your license, which is to pass your road test. That's where you're in a car driving around and you have an examiner in the car next to you telling you what to do as they grade your performance on the spot. And yes, it's a really nerve-wracking experience, I have to say. But it's the part where you finally get your license, which is also exciting. So I got my driver's permit around around May 2016, and it was actually only valid for 2 years, which meant that I needed to pass my road test and get my license within this time frame. Now, back then, 2 years sounded like a long time to me, and honestly, at the time, I was just so relieved to finally have gotten my permit, a seemingly impossible task, that I was ready to refocus my energy on the other things that I had on my plate as a busy college student, like homework, group projects, extracurricular events. So to be honest, practicing for my road test kind of took a backseat, pun intended, and I just kept saying, I'll do it next summer when I have more time, or I'll do it next year, I need to focus on this now. But eventually, I found myself in my last semester of college freaking out about how I was about to graduate, freaking out about how I was about to lose my permit, and freaking out about the fact that I was about to start working and needed to drive more than ever before in my time in Minnesota. So of course, I started getting desperate to get my license. And now, tip for life in general, don't postpone anything that doesn't need to be postponed. If there's a task that you need to get done that does not need to wait and you have the time and ability to do it now, just get it done. But as a senior in college, I thankfully knew more people on campus who had cars this time in college. So I had more friends to turn to, more options of teachers to learn from. But the problem this time was that my friends, I realized, were really bad teachers. They were amazing drivers, but because they had started learning at such a young age and they had been driving for a while, they had internalized the knowledge so well that they didn't know how to communicate it to a beginner. The thing is, most of my friends in college who were already licensed drivers tended to be American, because in this country, kids tend to learn driving at a really young age, as early as 15 or 16 in many states. One of my friends even says that the only memory he has from his driving test was how much his dad yelled at him in the days leading up to it, so not very helpful. I got a lot of "I think so" and "I really don't remember" type of advice from my friends, which really wasn't useful for somebody who was trying to get her license in a very short amount of time. So I did the next best thing I could. I found a teacher. And fortunately for me, in a small town, I found a guy who ran a small driving school who was able to come pick me up in the car from my house on campus and then take me driving for 2 hours and then drop me off back at home. So I didn't need a car, I didn't need somebody to take me to this driving school, which was great. And to be honest, I had actually heard of this guy much earlier in my college experience. In fact, as soon as I got my permit 2 years before. But at the time, because I found out that he charged a fee of $100 a lesson, I was pretty scared about that. I'm a student, I don't make a lot of money, I didn't know how I was going to pay for that, so I just kind of let go of the idea and I stopped pursuing it. But by my senior year of college, I had gotten much better at managing my money, and I decided to make a rare decision to ask my parents for some help to pay for this program. I decided that I really needed to drive, I really needed to get my license, and my time was running out. So I asked for my parents for no more than $300, 3 lessons, 2 hours each. First of all, because I was still trying this teacher out and I wanted to make sure that I was getting the experience that I was paying for. And second of all, because I just felt so bad asking my parents that I didn't want to have to ask for anything more than I knew I needed. I know that choosing to pay for a teacher is not something that everybody can do. For me, I decided that it was an investment that I was willing to make because I really needed a teacher who was knowledgeable and up to date on the latest driving laws and who also had the teacher skills that I needed, somebody who knew how to convey this information effectively for me to learn. So I took the plunge, signed up for 3 lessons, but looking back, this was a very ambitious goal. I thought that in 3 lessons, I was going to be ready for my road test after 2 years of not doing anything since getting my permit. Lo and behold, when I finally went to the DMV to take my driving test, I failed. It was an incredibly snowy day, first of all, so the roads were just covered in snow and slush and ice, and I could barely see the lane markings. I was still getting to know the lane markings and could barely see them. And for the parking test, there was actually a huge mountain of snow in the parking spot that I was supposed to back into, so I really had a hard time reversing and ended up knocking one of the cones. But funnily enough, the driving examiner was really nice and said, you know what, it's snowing, I'm not going to mark you down for that. My nerves went down until the test was almost over, and when I was supposed to make a left turn back into the driving school, I forgot to look for oncoming traffic, so that's where he marked me down and I lost it. But the important message here is you will feel nervous on test day, whether or not you're a naturally nervous person. Because you're taking a huge test and someone's watching your every move, it's natural that you're going to feel anxious. Plus, the DMV instructors are notoriously unfriendly, unhappy people, so it adds to the experience of intimidation and fear. But on top of just practicing how to drive, I also recommend that you stay relaxed on test day and don't let your nerves get to you. Try not to let your nerves get to you and trust that your preparation is enough and that you know what you're doing. So I signed up for 3 more driving lessons and I thought to myself, okay, by now I would have been enrolled in 6 lessons. Of course, I'm going to be extremely prepared for the next time I take the test. But no, I went back to the same driving test and failed my second test again. You can imagine how nervous and how scared I was feeling at this point because I was getting really close to the 3 test marking. So in Minnesota, if you fail your test 3 times, I think you still get a 4th chance, but if you fail your test the first 3 or 4 times, then you'll have to be enrolled in at least 6 hours of driving lessons before you're allowed to take another test. So I actually decided to change my game up a little bit, and for my 3rd test, I went to a different driving center, not the same one that I've been going to for my first 2 tests. And for my Minnesota watchers, I actually went to the driving test center in Eagan, which I personally really recommend because first of all, it's an enclosed driving course specifically for students who are there for their driving tests, so you won't be competing with stressful traffic. And another reason why I felt like I was having trouble in my previous test center was the roads were not clearly painted. The roads were really bad and pretty deteriorated, and I couldn't really see the lane markings, snow or no snow. And in this course in Eagan, the lane markings were really freshly painted. I could see where I was going, so if the instructor wanted me to take a very specific turn or a very specific move, I could tell exactly what they wanted me to do and not miss a beat. I know it seems silly to pay attention to how freshly painted the roads are, but you'd be surprised by how bad roads can be across the US. So if you can, that might be a small thing to do to make it easier on yourself. I also recommend going when it's not snowing or icy so you can see the road. But what was extra stressful about my 3rd try wasn't just that it was my 3rd try, but it was also on May 1st. And guess what? My permit was going to expire on May 3rd. I had 2 days to make this happen. Somehow luck was on my side that day. Sun was shining, snow had melted. I was in a brand new scenery, a brand new setting. And with that, I think came a fresh new breath of confidence. I felt like I could do this. In fact, even when I drove into this new driving course, the guy at the test center greeted me with a smile and wished me good luck, which you almost never get at the DMV. So anyway, I waited my turn. The driving examiner came into my car. And I should mention at this point, after I had enrolled in this driving school, I no longer needed to rely on a friend to drive me back and forth to the DMV because this guy's driving business, part of the deal is on the day of your test, you get to use his car to go to the driving test center and you can use the car for the test. But anyway, I sat in the car, the examiner came into the seat and the test began. And honestly, this guy was the crabbiest, most unpleasant, most unfriendly DMV examiner I had had in my entire experience. And he was marking me down here and there. He was making comments throughout my entire exam saying that whatever I did wasn't smooth, my parking wasn't great. At the end of the test, this guy literally pulled up his clipboard, recited everything that I had done wrong before he turned to me and went, "But you passed." I can't tell you how relieved I felt in that moment. I thought I was dreaming. I swear I thought I was dreaming because I thought that I had failed again. He turned to me, gave me a slip of paper and said, "Go inside and apply for your license." I never thought I would hear those words. I got out of the car and I see my driving teacher waiting for me in the distance. I gestured to him that everything went well and he was so happy for me. And he was like, "Go in there, apply for your license. I'll wait out here for you." So I did. And the DMV had a really long line that day, so it did take quite a while before it was finally my turn to apply for my license. But I left the DMV in Eagan feeling incredibly relieved, knowing that there would be a license coming to my mailbox in about 5 to 6 weeks. And when it came, it was the best feeling ever. So yes, there are theoretically only 2 steps that you need to take to get your license in Minnesota. Pass your theory test and get your permit, pass your road test and get your license. But as you can tell from my very long-winded story, there are a lot of obstacles along the way, and how easily you can achieve those 2 steps may depend on your circumstances, what state you're living in, what resources you have access to. But I hope that my story was inspirational in some way or helpful or insightful in helping you get this process started for yourself. And now I want to hear from you. What state do you live in? Are you already licensed to drive there? Are you already licensed to drive in your home country? And I also want to know if you've noticed any differences or cultural differences between driving in the US and driving in your home country. So let me know in the comments below. Seriously, I read all of the comments and I love learning about your experiences. And if you like what you saw today, please give this video a quick thumbs up. It really helps this channel out, and it really always means a lot. And if you're not already subscribed to this channel, then please hit that subscribe button now so that you can stay tuned for more international student and travel content like this. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you in the next video.